What's going on, guys? Here's another video about how to do an inspection, and in this case we have a car with 100,000 miles on it, has had no maintenance done whatsoever, and it just came in for grinding brakes. That's right, surprise. So you, as a technician or an inspector, you get your sheet and it says at the very top, grinding brakes, check vehicle, and it could be any vehicle really, guys. At this point it's got 100,000 miles, and as usual you want to draw your cross, and right in the cross you want to write down initial, ISO 1, ISO 2, and PMI. So let's get and do that right out of the gate. Initial, ISO 1, ISO 2, and PMI. Alright, so again, the car's got 100,000 miles on it. Let's get the initial. You get in there and you see that the front pads and rotors are grinding. Now if you go to the circle of sales, you'll find out that we don't pitch anything over $700 or $600, and you want to get in there and sell the pads and rotors. That's going to be the initial. Now, how long does it take you to figure that out? Probably as soon as you put it up in the air. Hell, you probably figure that as soon as you get in the car. So it shouldn't take you much long to get that looked at. Once you do that, you can actually pass that on right to the front office. And in number 2, you can write down possible calipers. So in quadrant 2, number these guys. Remember, top left clockwise, starting at top left. So if you look here, in the initial you wrote down brake pads and rotors confirmed, please pitch, and in here you wrote down possible calipers, maybe even past possible hoses. But you're not writing this down until what? You get this approved. So this helps your service advisor that, hey, it needs pads and rotors and it possibly will need calipers and hoses. We won't know until we get this approved. So that's the way I would do it. So you go ahead and get this up to them in about 10 minutes, both of these. They call back, they get the customer's approval within 30 minutes. You take it apart and then you see, yes, it does need calipers and hoses, so you go ahead and confirm that. And then you also see an ISO 2, which again, if you check the can job sheet, you will find out ISO on brakes, especially when it has pads and rotors grinding. You write down rear brakes are low and also a brake flush. Then you could write down brake flush and even ISO 1. Again, guys, ISO 1 and ISO 2 is a gray line. How you want to split up the ISO is really up to you, but it also has to fit the circle of sales. The circle of sales tells you that you should not be pitching more than $1,000 to $1,200 on the first ISO, and on the initial you should not be pitching more than $600 to $700. So as long as you can stay within those numbers and it's digestible for your customer, you can pitch however you want to break this up, because every car will be different. If you're doing Mercedes brakes, you could just get up to $1,000 on pads and rotors. If you're doing a Chevy Impala or something, you could probably get pads, rotors, and hoses and calipers within ISO 1. That all said, it's up to you, but we all agree that when you're doing pads and rotors that are grinding, you want to sell on the ISO 1 calipers, hoses, and brake fluid, or pass on the brake fluid to ISO 2 and then get rear brakes, brake fluid. And in my opinion, you should check the suspension, especially struts if it's nosediving, and that should be pretty much good for ISO on brakes. Pads and rotors all the way around, calipers if it needs them in the front or in the rear, hoses, brake flush, and then if it's nosediving for shocks and struts. At this point, you are all set with the ISO 2. And again, ISO 1 and ISO 2, based on amounts, you want to break them up so that way you get it all approved. Now you can move on right to the PMI, and as you remember from the last video, a PMI is based on where you're working and then slowly move away from that. So in this case, you want to start out PMI, which is preventative maintenance inspection. Anything under body would be really easy because you're already in the brake system, so anything suspension related. And in this case, like I said, struts and shocks are already ISO on these cars, on all cars. And also I would check tie rods, alignment, because it's a lot easier to tell the customer, hey, while we were doing your brakes, we noticed that your tie rods are loose, your sway bar link is missing, your alignment is off, so on and so forth. Anything underbody, I would say, is appropriate for you to start the PMI with. Again, you just need a starting point for your PMI. When people say, give me a PMI, a lot of techs just start scrambling, looking all over the car. So I need you to start with where you're already working, because that makes a lot of sense. Plus, as a technician, it's a lot easier for you to do that because you're literally right there. Once you're done with that, I would move on right to fluids, because fluids are very important. But the fluids I would move on to would be the underbody fluids, such as any differential fluids or any on the brake system, which you already have that approved. On top of that, I would check your power steering and any underbody leaks. Because again, you're under the car doing brakes or next to the side of the car, underbody leaks. After that, you can move on to any 100,000 mile deferred service because again, this car has 100,000 mile and has not had any service done. So after you do all the underbody inspection on the PMI, you can move on to the rest. So guys, just to recap, once again, car comes in with a grinding brakes at 100,000 miles. The first thing I would tell you to do is get the pads and rotors approved, whichever ones are grinding. Move right into the calipers and hoses and brake fluid. And again, in the same ISO or in the next ISO, the rest of the brakes, if fronts or rears, whichever ones you're not doing, you get those approved. And then you can move on to anything with the suspension, especially with the shocks and struts. That's also part of the isolation. And finally, you can move on to the PMI, which is going to be starting with where you're working on the brake system. So start out with anything under body, suspension, tie rods, etc. Fluids underneath the body, especially if it's an SUV, you want to do differential fluids. Any lines or any leaks under a body. And once you're done with all that, you can move on to any deferred service on fluids up top, and then the rest of the vehicle. Unless, of course, there's a safety concern that needs to be addressed, always comes first. But remember, the customer's initial concern even comes before that. And in this case, it seems to be also be a safety concern. So this would be a really easy initial. Please do not kitchen sink the customers. We've already said that. The way we do this is running around the bases. You do not want to pitch all this at once. You want to do it in 1, 2, 3, and 4. So first base, second base, third base, fourth base. And it's really easy as a technician not to waste your time, because if you can't even get this approved, why waste your time doing all of this? So that's why we get this approved, move on to the next one. That way you're able to build sellable tickets and make the service writer's life a lot easier, get a lot of sales, and also make the customer's life easier because they get to digest this information and we communicate like hell instead of just throwing everything at them and then getting nothing and scaring our customers. I hope this video was helpful. That is how I would build a very easy sellable ticket. But that all said, guys, I hope this was helpful. We'll see you on the next video.